And I think it's important to differentiate between the private client and the government as a client, because in the private client, it's that one or two, it's consistent. It's the same individuals you're interacting for the next 3 years, 4 years, whatever time. In the government, and that continues to change, not only do their roles change, people change, priorities also change.
Government is in fact trying to offload everything to private entities.
Everyone goes for nature, rather than living with nature. And I think that one needs to overcome.
And so unrealistic numbers are thrown at us, unrealistic timelines are thrown at us. But the way out is just to stick to your vision and to make sure that you're completing your project to the level and to the intent that you wanted to fructify.
One word about working with the government.
Patience.
Yo-yo ride.
Let me brief you about the next panel discussion of the day, titled Building Legacies for the People, by the People. A legacy is more than what we leave behind. It's a philosophy and a commitment to ethics that resonate across time and generations. Integrity, creativity, and social responsibility are values that continue to build and inspire, as exhibited by visionaries like B.V. Doshi, Charles Correa, and a few more. Today, what we see revolves around people, dwellings that shelter multi-families, institutions that nurture future generations, museums that honor archives, and the threshold between space and ecology. This discussion brings together vision and ideas that transcend both time and generations, shaping the future of inclusive and healthy communities. Without further ado, I'll hand over the stage to our moderator, Ms. Manisha Agarwal.
Thank you so much, Elev8, for the wonderful introduction and getting us into this space again. Hopefully, it will be a memorable afternoon where we will be discussing things which relate to a profession we have lived and hopefully understand it a little better on what we leave behind. So I think one of the things that she mentioned, whether it's an unrealized, sorry, I should keep it here, whether it's unrealized ideas or built work, each legendary architect and their projects have withstood the test of time. So what I would like to begin asking is, what does legacy mean to each of you personally? So if you can just elaborate on your sort of understanding, and it can be in any order as you'd like.
Hello. Yeah. So to me, having worked with I.M. Kadri for the past 29 years or so now, the legacy that he has put in place, to me represents a kind of a timeless architecture, which, if I were to elaborate on that, that would mean that whatever he created in the past decades, he started his practice in 1958 or so, post-independence, and so whatever he created in that day and age is still relevant today. And there's so much to learn from what he's done, iconic buildings that he's designed, always rooted in the local context. And even so many years ago, he actually adopted the sustainable principles. So it's amazing, the kind of work that he's put in. And we as a firm are really proud of the legacy he's put in place, and we really look up to him. And I think the future generations can also learn a lot from what he's done already. Yeah.
Hi. Little more general. Thank you for this opportunity. And I think the larger, we got this gist of the questions that you will be posing to us. So this thing about legacy has been, I think it's about the spirit of the time. And I think every time will have and leave behind a different kind of legacy. For example, just to give a simple example, if it was 1800s, mid 1800s, probably about the Swadeshi movement, that created the independence movement. Then there was a whole legacy there. Then we got independent, and then there is a certain kind of architecture that we did. The times now, and each of those is the spirit of that time. And I think it's what we will do now, and probably 50 or 40 years from now when they look back, I think that will be the legacy of this time. And it's, one is the time and one is the individuals who dedicate themselves to that purpose. So that's the way I would look at legacy.
Thanks for having me here. It's a pretty interesting panel. For me, the way I see legacy is if we could have minimal human trace, and ideally if nature can take over every time we try to do something, that would be an ideal way, but that's me personally. Professionally, what I think is that if we can create places which allows everybody to freely express themselves, whether it is a privately defined or privately owned space, or whether it is publicly owned and publicly created. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very interesting thread. How do people express themselves in any space? And I think what it means in a professional scenario is also the kind of social responsibility we have to create, whether it's communities or whether it's spaces that a continuum of ethics that one has. So in a professional specific space, like you mentioned, there is this whole idea, I think, of how do we transcend time, and how do we kind of create this whole idea of what you want to be remembered by. So I think, yeah, coming to the next section, it's to do with space and ecology. One, if you can, the relationship between space and ecology is also something which evolves. It's not a constant. So in the last 10 years or 20 years, what I've seen of whether it's Mumbai, where we grew up and we live now, or in Ahmedabad, since we were studying here and kind of moved ahead, there has been so much change. Whether it's the coastal road in Mumbai, which is close to the sea and it's kind of intersecting the sea as well, or whether you see Sabarmati, they both have been spaces which have been working with certain kind of ecologies. So in your experience, can you highlight any examples which have have had any kind of holistic development, or where, whether it's a government initiative or otherwise, which are successful? So anything that you'd like to...
It's a very, I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. So one of the things that I sort of keep wondering about is longevity of what we create, like actual physical presence of it, because I keep thinking about it, that when is it going to become a ruin and how is it going to become a ruin? So I keep thinking about, what is the sort of level of permanence of what we are building. And, I was thinking, I mean, I've traveled other parts of the world, and some of them are, sort of called, so to say, developed countries and all that. And earlier, until very recently, I had an opinion that every time you look at this public infrastructure and spaces and things like that, you would wonder, like per capita, how much has been spent and what they've built, like it's enormous. But of late, I have realized that some of those sort of infrastructure or public spaces are decades old or centuries old. And to me, that justifies using resources in a right way. Everything that we do, it distracts nature in some way. Yeah, like we are taking something from it. What I try to compare when we are trying to do public spaces and also like make observations here, not just now, but even traditionally. traditionally we had that sense that when we make a building that is, meant for shared purpose, they've lasted centuries, in many cases. But many times recently, there is this sort of need for speed and transformation, and we forget that the process that we need to follow in order to make places which are far more, sort of they're built in such a way that they last much longer, not just physically, but even sort of their transformability, So I mean, something as simple as Marine Drive in Mumbai, like it's built in such a robust way. And something, I've seen it at least for now, 20, 25 years, and it's marginally weathered, and I can see that it might just work out, fine for at least 100, 200 years old. And I'd like to see that more and more projects take care of these aspects that, when we make something, even if it costs, probably double the amount of money, can it, last that long, that we justify those resources spent? Yeah.
Yeah, any place that resonates with.
So I just want to make a observation here from one of my projects that I'm doing in Mumbai. There is this large society. So I'm working with societies, housing societies in their redevelopment. Societies in Bombay are very old, and so most of them are now going into redevelopment. So there's this one particular society which is 25,000 square meters land area, and they're like 60 to 70 years old, dilapidated buildings. In that time, the buildings were built G+4, okay? So they have a lot of open space on their plot, which, so it's not only us architects who are trying to increase the open spaces in the city and all that, awareness is seeping into people, the laymen as well. So what they came to us saying was, so in Bombay, where the real estate value is really high, we were really taken aback when this society came to us and said, we don't want to utilize the entire FSI at all. We want you to maintain the openness that we have in this society and design accordingly. It's all right if we don't, consume the entire FSI. Just make our project feasible. So just build enough so that it supports the project. So I think the awareness amongst common people is something that came as a surprise to, at this level, which came as a surprise to us. And I think that's a good sign. Yeah, moving ahead, probably more instances of this type will help us improve the amount of open space that is available in the city. Right now it's too low, needs to increase.
No, I think that's a lovely example. I had something else in mind, but I think this is interesting. It's also probably a redevelopment kind of project. One of the changes that not only 10 years, one wants to go back a little long, a little further behind. That I think the larger game is the real estate game, and where more and more, because of the real estate values, we are becoming more an interior culture. We are dominated, and so what has happened is we've compartmentalized ourselves. We all love nature, but then we will go for a trek, or we'll go for something else, we'll do something. But the everyday connection with nature is largely reducing, because I think it's a reality of hard urban lives of a certain kind. So, like the verandas or the courts, for that matter, when you had smaller houses, or when you had, even if they were row houses of smaller nature, you had a relationship to the ground and the sky as an individual. You owned that much of the sky and that much of the ground. Those are now far more shared and far more enclosed. So, the challenge for us as designers is, I think, some of the things that you just mentioned, that how do you convince large scale, because the real estate values the large scale systems to come back and look at the idea of nature into that system. So this is just an observation. So
Yeah, no, I think it's very apt that you mention, whether it's at the granular level or it is at the larger level or even at the public level, how do these kind of imaginations start constructing scenarios where one can engage more holistically, especially in very, very dense urban environments? Because I think that's one disconnection, like which you rightfully pointed out. Everyone goes for nature, rather than living with nature. And I think that one needs to overcome. Coming to another segment which they've mentioned is, can architecture be something that addresses problems? So if one looks at inflow in cities, Ahmedabad has seen incredible growth, so has Bombay, or so many cities in India, the sizes of the cities keep increasing everywhere. With the kind of influx of migrant population, what would you imagine as a possibility, which is like an idea by the government or something which can be done to include that kind of growth and still create a sustainable environment for people to live in? So I think, yeah, I mean, that is, any suggestions, any sort of ideas about that would be great.
I think we have to reduce our city-centric policies. Now, this is a larger policy. I mean, this, as architects, we will not be able to do much, but maybe as planners, as policymakers, because whether it is health, education, or entertainment, they're all only available in the cities.
Urban centers.
And so you can't blame people for moving towards the cities, and we are ill-equipped with the speed at which the change is happening. So either at a larger policy level, this has to be worked on, in which we are able to probably in either tier 3 cities and even maybe smaller towns, very, very small towns, if we can make life at a policy level, we can make life that allows these, the larger 3 or 2 things that really what every family is looking for available. We would, jobs obviously, which first, and then comes the rest. I think a lot will be, I think the only way to actually circumvent this would be at a large level. Otherwise, we'll have to tackle with it on an everyday basis.
Yes, this is not an easy one to solve. Like, it requires everybody's effort. As Surya said, like policy level, that how do you sort of reverse the growth, and have these smaller towns and villages where people come from actually find the similar allure of life, that this is going to be fun or things like that. And we try to understand psyche of the people, what works and not. It seems that even with, sort of large part of the population, there is this conflict, to be or not to be. Like whether they should move to the city, or how frequently they should visit, or how much of that life they should imbibe. There's this, and I think if we have to sustain the growth, we will have to become decentralized to a point, because as much as cities are trying to upgrade the infrastructure, now that is not just the sort of road, sewage, water supply, and stuff like that. Even the kind of attentions that we have seen in last 3-4 decades in many cities in India of making better public spaces. Because see, what happens is that when you come from outside, your resources are very frugal, and even if you think that you have a lot, compared to, if you compare that with sort of city rates, you have very little. So what you rely on is shared spaces, to sort of say that I have good life. Like, in Mumbai, if you're on, I'll again mention Marine Drive. If you're on Marine Drive, you feel that you're equal, and that sort of liberating experience. We can create public places, where everybody can come together on a level playing field. It could be quite interesting.
So I just want to bring up a different perspective. So when migration has been going on into urban centers, has been going on for so many years, we cannot stop it, right? So how do we, and what is happening, case of Mumbai, is they come in and there is no place for them to live. There is nothing affordable that is available to them. So what happens is they go into slums, right? We are looking at slum rehabilitation. We redevelop slums, but then there's a new pocket of slum that comes up because migrants are constantly coming into the city. So maybe what should be looked at is how do we make affordable housing, you can't stop it. So how do you make affordable housing available to them? Maybe what should be done is, arrange for some transit accommodation facility where they are given some sort of accommodation at a very affordable rate. Alternatively, give them rental, put up rental facilities at again an affordable rate. And by the time they transition from the transit to the rental, maybe make an affordable house available to them. So slum should not be an alternative. The slum formation should be put to a stop.
So
right?
are you saying that government should get into this and make social housing like the way it is in Sweden and places like that?
Yes, I believe
So
that is.
it's a very interesting space. I've been trying to think about this for some time now. How do we prioritize resources spending, like how as in government, because if you see like large part of the projects, now even highways, what they call as HEM model, that it's a hybrid model that 30% is paid by government and 70% is paid by the contractor, and they will sort of, there are time-based incentives and all sorts of things. So government is in fact trying to offload everything to private entities. These, the temporary housing that you're talking about, which sort of comes up everywhere, they are privately owned. The fact that the people who come to live there, they do not have the kind of resources that they can pay to live in more permanent or more pakka houses or houses with bigger facility, more spaces per capita, they have to stay in those houses until they make it big, right? So it is entirely sort of interestingly working system. I think the problem is somewhere omnipresent everywhere across our society, that unless and until we lift every individual, and bring this awareness that, there is something called shared wealth, I think it's not an easy one for anybody to solve.
I agree with you to some extent.
Yeah. No, I think what was very interesting is you mentioned institutions, making of institutions, and you mentioned creating community spaces or open spaces, and you mentioned accommodating housing. And I think all these are very valid concerns. And I think one of the things which one realizes, and this is from the earlier panel discussion, densification is not necessarily bad. It's how you do it and how it can be augmented, and at the same time create infrastructure to connect you to different places much faster. And maybe that can be a scenario which one can look at possibly in the future of enabling cities and growth which takes place. You have
And
a contrary thing?
Especially this point.
Yeah.
Because you're saying densification. And look at Bombay. Except Marine Drive, you've already built roads which have ruined Haji Ali. You've gone all the way, because Marine Drive, the people are not powerful enough, you've not taken the road across.
Yeah.
The point is that infrastructure, if it overtakes life,
Yeah.
I think there is a problem. So densification, I think there's a thing about jobs. If all jobs are going to be located, all good things are going to be located in the big metros, this is going to be a problem. There is going to be people coming. Migration is not the problem, it's the scale of the migration that we have to worry about. The speed at which it is happening in the shortest of times. And we will have to think about this at a larger policy level, because look at the infrastructure that's coming in Bombay. It's just amazing. It's like actually, it's an animal of a different kind.
Yeah. No, I think the problem with the infrastructure right now, from where I look at it, whether it's the coastal road, which has been under a lot of debate, is the problem the public infrastructure is hugely lacking. What the coastal road caters to today is largely the cars, the private car. So if infrastructure was to be augmented, what kind of infrastructure one augments is very, very critical. Where, again, there can be business districts, there can be densities in, so if you look at an example like Tokyo, or you look at an example of Singapore, you know, the densities are very, very high. But how do people move? The infrastructure is much more seamless than what one observes. It was relevant at a particular time, but today if one was to relook at it, they imagine a city which is of course going to work one day, but today the whole city is dug up and it's a mess. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword in that sense.
I agree with you that it's the priorities.
Yes.
It's not against infrastructure, it's the prioritizing the kind of infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah. Coming on to another question which they've given is, now we're going ahead in time. So if we look at 2050, how do you as an architect envision an India we'll be living in? So do you have what kind of major gaps and shortcomings? We've spoken about a few, but any others you think through policy making which can be looked at?
I majorly think affordable housing is a big issue and slums,
Yeah.
alleviating poverty.
Alleviating poverty. I think equity of any kind, whether it's social space, whether it's living space, whether it's recreational space, I think, yeah.
I think since we are talking as architects or designers who, if we can figure out ways in which we can empower and enable processes of constructing, let's say. Because one of the other problems that our practice also tries to see is that we try to see a lot of the skills that people have already, like whether it is masonry skills, carpentry or other kinds of skills that already exist in our fabric. How do we multiply them and move them further on? So there where we are not, right now the industrial processes are so powerful that, and the speed at which change is happening, the industrial process obviously answers to the time. But there is a lot of skill that we hope is not lost, and one would love to see, if you're saying 2050, one would love to see more and more of, buildings that are made by hand over time.
So skill building.
Yes.
So we have to talk about craft and technology then.
Sorry?
we have to talk about craft and technology then, whether, we sort of want to focus on craft or also balance it with technology.
That craft and technology will obviously evolve.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What kind of evolution that may be is the question.
Yes. I see one of the sort of major thing that we'll be dealing with is waste disposal.
Sorry?
Waste disposal. And I think if we, at least, I think India, it's fairly dense, like spread out with the land mass that we have and the kind of garbage that we are producing, the kind of pollution of water that we see. Coldplay concert, yeah.
I can imagine it's the hangover of the concert.
So, even the construction materials, we built poorly, in many parts, especially smaller towns and villages, there is, since concrete, it seemed like that you can stick anything to any object and it would work. But I think all of it's, it's going to crumble in 10, 15, 20 years. Things which were like built in 1980s we're already seeing the impact of it, these redevelopments and all this kind of stuff. So how are we going to take care of those materials and how are we going to sort of make sense of it? Because if we don't recycle them and make something out of all that debris, we're going to be in problem. Where are we going to dump that? And similarly, with the wastage, like we don't have water. I mean, we're talking about tertiary treatment plants for sewage and giving it to industries and things like that. Because there is no clean water that you can part with, and this is still already like not the best quality of water in large part of this country, yeah. So I think I see that as one of the major challenges.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting point because when you look at the 80s buildings, some of the buildings that were built in the 80s here and here, they're already, I mean, we are talking
Crumbling.
about 40 years ago and they're already coming for redevelopments. So quality of this building was so poor. So yes, I think this is going to be a huge question. The idea of debris.
Yeah. No, I think natural resources and how do we look at waste, kind of reusing them in the building systems that we are proposing. As an architect, I think that is the responsibility, one of the responsibilities we have. Besides, whether it is even land, I mean, you know, how do you create, whether it's certain kind of hybrid programming or flexibility of spaces.
Yes.
And I think it can go from, our roles are still limited as architects in that sense, though we can aspire to do a lot more. But I think the largeness of the concerns is something that one should address through practice.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, if you make buildings that could be multifunctional, for example,
Yes.
a building that doesn't have to be broken down if it doesn't work later, but if the building can be repurposed very
Yes.
easily, which means as architects, we need to be able to imagine something that's not so site-specific, I mean, so purpose-specific.
Yes.
And in that sense, maybe. And the building that's a robust building that would last long.
Yeah. No, I think one is already looking at heritage buildings being transformed, and because they still have a lot of life in them. But our buildings, we are looking at just demolition as a kind of a solution to start again. And architects, I mean, we also, the profession believes that that is the direction for development, which it need not be. And I think one needs to look at it. Another sort of thing is like we've all been affiliated to some institutions, and so there are around 150 institutions of national importance, whether it's NITs, IITs, and there's a lot of change happening within that particular educational sector as well. What would you, let me read this one out. There's some which are undergoing renovation, expansion, and new development. As an architect, what are the kind of challenges that one looks at when one thinks of whether it's a new identity or continuing the vision of an institute? What are the kind of things that in your practice or otherwise one senses that one needs to look at more carefully? So, yeah.
Wow, at first it seemed like that it was a general question, then it came to our practice.
No, it can be general as well. I mean, I just said if you want to start off from practice.
No. So what I, sort of continuing in what, in the direction that I earlier sort of mentioned, so two things that I feel strongly. I don't know whether it is just me because, I'm sort of slightly older than what I was before. But I feel that in our times, I have the speed at which we have seen the change. I have not seen newer institutions, or I have not seen evolution of older institutions, And I feel that we have seen the conventions being changed, but not the institutions or the creations of institutions. And all of that includes, that sort of caters to more flexible life or life with more choices, which all of that is available right now, correct? And all of us are sort of paying heavily for our own individual needs because we don't have shared spaces of such kind where we can all feel comfortable in these places. So I feel that if there were more and more institutions which were catering to, common needs, so to say, like libraries, the traditional libraries were, simply for book readings, but now you can do a lot more in those spaces. So those kind of community spaces, the role of IITs, IIMs, and many other institutes of national importance, for the longest time I have been critical, especially because, coming from SEPT, I knew how much we were receiving from government and how much they were receiving from government. The amount of money that are spent on them, those students, and the contribution to the society, for bringing timely sort of adaptations to what's going on with industries or institutions. I feel somewhere they have failed in sort of helping us cope up, because they tend to get sort of powerful positions of IITs, so to say, of innovations, IIM, so to say, managers. I feel that they can create these opportunities where ecosystem of recycling and making things that are generally well balanced and not just sort of profit making,
Yeah, I think the problem is partly to do with the way they were planned at a certain level. I think amazing architecture, because some of the masters have done these projects and they are multifunctional in many ways. But they are large islands. And I think campuses of such nature shouldn't be islands because of the walls that we have and because they seem to be sites, they are so specific for a particular purpose. I know in whether it's London or whether in the Western hemisphere, you have a lot of large institutions which are part of the urban fabric. They would look, you could actually walk in and out of these institutions. In the make of that, kind of changes the halo that we have. And I think the problem that he is talking about, the criticality of it, is the problem is because they get so self-centered in a way. They're producing great students and people who will practice well, but they're still, in a certain sense, it's like you walk through that door, you're an elite. Till that point, you may be like any one of us, but the moment you walk through that door, it's a different world. And you will come out and you will be part of a different world. So how do we change those relationships with society is something that we need to think about. Whether they should be islands. So in terms of the larger plan dispensation in a city, do we give them large chunks of land with, the institution in between with a lot of trees? And so we'd say we're very happy because the trees are there, but we don't know who's doing what there. So one of the interesting things that happens in this city, there's this program that it's called Abhivyakti. Most of your students may know. It opens up these institutions for about 10-15 days where there's an art show, which is again sponsored by some corporates. And there is a lot of theater art that happens within these spaces of these institutions, all the way. And in those few days, these institutions are opened up. And I think it does make some difference. So it's just a small thing. But I think in some ways we need to figure out a way that these institutions start speaking to their own immediate surroundings.
The newer institutes, meaning that they're expanding, right? There are more IIMs and more IIT campuses that are coming up. The space available for these new campuses is always outside the city. So you're again putting them away and giving them that elite status. So, or is it that there's no space available within the city to accommodate them?
We mark out 300 acres for a campus or 200 acres for a campus. That's the kind of things that these campuses take up. So one wonders whether you really,
being utilized or not.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very valid suggestion also. How do campuses get integrated better, whether it is in urban fabric or in people's minds, and maybe even if they're not in the heart of the city, maybe they have a center there, or something which has certain kind of an outreach program which gets inclusive, and it hosts events or it hosts certain kinds of communities to come and intersect when the schools are not in session or even when the schools are in session, so that those spaces don't remain islands, I think. I think that is the challenge which one can have. And also I think because growth, a lot of the campuses which we see did not imagine growth. So the master plans, which today, like if you look at some of the new universities, it's always shocking at the scale at which they have manifested their and the other thing which I think universities did, earlier universities did not, is they did not think of it as integrate, they were like an IIT will be only STEM based, which also will be only engineering. So I think management starts creeping in slowly, or product design, but that's it. I mean, if you look at a lot of the institutions in the US or in the UK, some of the more traditional institutions, they were always good for many different fields. And the kind of communities that were fostered even within, there was a lot of interdisciplinary learning. And I think that is something which institutes today also need to acknowledge, and which places like Ashoka, places, some of them are starting to do it, but they've been identified more as liberal arts then. Again, there's a tag. So I think they need to kind of both within and with the city, they need to engage and possibly create an imagination. Another question is, in institutes, there is a whole sort of an evolution even within an institute, whether it is flexible classrooms, for example. Are there any things which you feel could benefit the making of institutes within the campus or within the buildings?
Well, we've experimented with some things but it all depends on the management finally. The design may do a lot of things, but when a system is run, how it shapes itself over time. So, like when we do a school, we try and see if there are certain functions of a school, which is the library or which are certain other things, which can become easily a part of the community around, because schools normally work up to 2 o'clock. And post that, if these facilities could be available. So in one of the institutions, we had tried that, and it did run for about 2 years and less. Then they found it too much of a challenge to run a club kind of a thing where students or neighbors and others who lived around came and accessed their facilities. They preferred to close it at 2 o'clock and go home because they had to set up a whole system. So I think those are management issues. But I think through design, we can definitely allow certain kind of function that can be partaked out, which could be useful to the community around. And because schools are one of the real estates that huge, humongous waste of, if you take a look at the hours that they're occupied only from morning 7:30, 7 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And rest of the time, they're just closed. And this is huge real estate. And I think we really need to work on a level at which potentially these are available for other purposes. So, yeah.
So in Bombay, there are lots of schools who, in the first place, Bombay having such a large population, they have 2 shifts, right? So the morning shift is there, there's an afternoon shift, and then there's a night shift where there's adult education care. Yeah. Some of the old schools in South Bombay, there's a night shift for adult education. So it is happening, but it's happening because of the need. I mean, there is a facility available and there is a demand, and so you satisfy the demand. But yeah, you could have more institutions looking at the same method of functioning.
Yeah, and this is something that I hope that we start talking about this. Vacant real estate.
Yeah.
Vacant real estate is big issue.
I can see Banduk smiling.
No, it's a flexibility. I think most architects in their ideal imagination would want that their building can become everything, right? So flexibility everybody tries to have in some or the other way. I mean, I am Ahmedabad downwards. I've tried to look at all buildings, especially institutes, so to say, how flexible they are or how they are not. I think if we sort of want to look at this more as that, we basically want flexibility as we evolve and say, for instance, there is a school, and in order to make a school, you don't have a large piece of land, but you still want to cater to a community. Is it possible that nearby there is a garden that can be used as a playground? Is it possible there is a sports facility somewhere? So and sort of somewhere that curriculum has that 10-20% of flexibility that actually allow you to be sort of enterprising in that way, that you explore your neighborhood in some way. I think that could be one nice way to do it while we figure out more flexible architecture. One of the institutes that I've found fascinating ever since I've never been able to go, so whatever that I'm saying is from my perception, is Nritya Gram by Gerard Dicona. And over the years, the way something for so formal as Indian classical dance, and the kind of in flexibility that I see in that, or or the way impromptu-ness that it offers, I find it quite remarkable. And I don't know if there are, and I feel that even with, material like granite slabs, it has done that. We have other examples of, granite buildings and all that. And I'm not sure to large part of the population if they can be called something where, I feel comfortable expressing myself. Like if I'm a student at a powerful institution, I feel powerful. But as an outsider, can I go and I feel that, okay, I socially belong here? To me, that's the kind of a problem that we need to understand with architecture when we are doing these institutes, that what is inclusive and what is exclusive.
I mean, I agree. So what we were talking about is adding of programs, and I agree with you. There is in Bombay, but it's not something which was intentional. It's happened because of a paucity of resources, and even open grounds. We have designed one school where actually they use the common public ground for their games and stuff, and they maintain it as well, so which benefits everyone. So after hours of school, the whole community is using those spaces. So I think there is a lot which one can enable. Regarding community centers, I'm just going to throw open one small thing that we have in Bombay at least, and I don't know if it exists in Ahmedabad, are something which we call as the YMCAs. So they are in some ways have become community centers because they promote sports, they promote different kinds of camps, activities. So any community center which you feel fulfills this purpose in today's environment and allows for social inclusivity as well as creates a kind of an extension to a home. If you can, and what are the kind of examples that you can come up with?
They're mostly open to sky spaces.
Sorry?
They're mostly open to sky spaces.
Ahmedabad, I'm personally, I mean, no, maybe Professor Gunjaria can help us with his, experience, but I can only say one thing, that there is something interesting in Ahmedabad that happens. It's the pocket parks. We have these very small parks spread all over, but we don't have a very large park maybe Bombay has its beach, but Hyderabad or Delhi have large park, or Bangalore, or even Hyderabad. They have these very large green lung, very, very large ones. Ahmedabad doesn't have something like that, but we have these lot of small pocket parks, and in these pocket parks, it's very interesting, especially one that where I live nearby. You will find age groups of all kinds who come morning to evening, different times, different people, and there are all kinds of things that you can do there. Whether it's the small exercise thing, whether it is a small yoga, whether it's a small room. So maybe these are those spaces which allow you that anonymity, yet if you are a regular, you make new friends, so it becomes in a way a default community space. Now how is it structured and aligned, whether it is just simply provision and then people find a way. So I find the pocket parks quite intriguing here in Ahmedabad.
It's a very interesting observation. I mean, even I wasn't aware of that, having lived here for so long. That
they're probably about an acre plus.
And who maintains them, or who kind of?
It's the government. It's the municipal corporation.
Oh, it is the municipal
A
corporation.
bunch of them are also CSR funded and maintained by them as well.
Now there is a group that has been funding some of the. The problem with that is that they get over-designed. The one that I have next to my house is, interestingly, when they actually started digging it up, I thought, my God, they're going to redesign this thing. Luckily, I think it didn't get redesigned, and somebody in the corporation did what they thought was best, and it actually caters to everybody, versus a certain sense of making place. I think the problem with all of us, I think as architects, is we have to make, things that have a certain.
It's like create the island.
Yeah, and whereas I find you should look at this park in Azad Society.
I have.
And it is a no-nonsense, anonymous, everyday kind of thing. You wouldn't look at it twice, but it works for everybody. In that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's an institution called Bal Bhavan. I don't know whether you know it, on Marine Drive. which used to cater only to people who lived in Girgaon, which is adjacent, low income group families, okay, children, Bal Bhavan, so for children. They didn't have funds, they couldn't maintain it, government thing. So how do you revive it? So what they started doing was they invited, what do you say, the art and craft classes or skating classes for chargeable for the other economic group, right? So as soon as this started happening and children from other places, I mean that there isn't, so in Bombay you don't have easy access to sports facilities, right? You have to pay a humongous amount to be able to go and play basketball or any such thing. So because they opened this facility up and they got these kids to come here, obviously the parents of those kids wanted to improve the facility, so they started pumping money in forms of donations, and then now it's revamped. Both sectors are using it, the lower income group as well as the high income group. So you have to think of such innovative interceptions to make this happen.
Yeah, no, the YMCAs which I'm talking about are also certain institutions which I've seen, and it's really fascinating having a personal experience there. My daughter used to go and play, and she went to a school which was not so inclusive, unfortunately, but there she met some really amazing friends, and I think that in Bombay in that sense is also a little more, you interact more closely, because not in institutions necessarily, but I think these kind of spaces, and you mentioned rightfully, whether it's beaches or whether it's, the beach really provides a lot of relief where every community coexists and uses. So I think this is one of the last questions in this. There is, I think all of us at some point interface with government projects, and how do you achieve long-term objectives, and whether it's meeting budgets, timelines, intent. If you can highlight an experience. I know that you all have just dealt with the walkway which we were talking about. So if you can highlight what kind of challenges did the firm face, or what were the kind of takeaways from that as learnings for everyone?
The challenge has always been to do with budgeting, timelines. So they impose unrealistic, and this is all politically driven, right? So because the political party which is there at that moment wants to complete a certain project to show that, how they have been instrumental in getting it to happen. And so unrealistic numbers are thrown at us, unrealistic timelines are thrown at us. But the way out is just to stick to your vision and to make sure that you're completing your project to the level and to the intent that you wanted to fructify, right? There are lots of challenges, but you just have to keep at it.
Yeah, we're working in Ahmedabad and some other smaller towns also, mostly in Gujarat government that we've dealt with. I think like any client, there are issues and revisions and this, that. There is a system that you have to reach to a stage in order to move to the next stage. You just cannot have like sort of overlaps like private projects, that like issue one thing and not issue another thing. So there are those kind of things, but other than that discipline, the only big complaint that one can have is that they pay less and pay slow. Okay, but if you stick to the task, I think there is nobody else is giving you the kind of opportunity that government can give as far as serving the public is concerned. So.
Yeah, we've only recently started. We've really not worked much. Only recently, last few years, we started. We also thought that we should think
but through
about.
the institution also, I mean through SEPT as
Yeah.
well, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, but first I'll.
Okay.
And I think it's important to differentiate between the private client and the government as a client, because in the private client it's that one or two, it's and consistent. It's the same individuals you're interacting for the next 3 years, 4 years, whatever time. In the government, and that continues to change, not only do their roles change, people change, priorities also change. But they need their documentation, because it's not about this person or it's not about that person. And so because of that, documentation processes that take time, and the decision making processes that need somebody to come by and push it, I think the government has its own hands tied itself into its own kind of loop. So it has its own challenges. In the end, and the biggest problem in the government, which all of us probably know, is the L1 problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of us have to work finally with the L1 contractor, and so that becomes the next challenge. Whereas in the private system, that may not necessarily be the. So the government, as much as it is a necessary evil, because the scales and the importance of its work cannot be negated. So we will, and I think it is a challenge, and as architects, as a fraternity, I think it is important that more and more of us work with them. And I think it's important because what has happened is over the last 30, 40, 50 years, I think a lot of the good architects with so much private work that a lot of the sensible architects have actually moved out of the government sphere. And I think it's important that we look at that as an issue and figure out that, because it's not about the product. Problem is that in a private thing, you get a product after 5 years and we are all happy, architect is happy, patting each other's back, and it's published or whatever else. In the government, that may take 10 years, 20 years, and may never even get published. It may not be really the one that you imagined it to be. But we will have to engage, and I think it's important to engage with the government. So, yeah, you were...
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I think that the thing that you also mentioned, which also struck, I mean, besides several things, is also the whole process of tendering, and this whole L1, even as an architect, to sometimes go through that process, which is still not transparent. I mean, I think that is one of the biggest hurdles we face Yeah, it was a competition. So we've actually done 3-4 institutes with the government, and all of them have been through competitions. So we tried to circumvent the system, but we've tried several times also with tendering, and we've never been successful. So I think, having said that, the challenge today is not just the government's changing or the kind of intent. The process of documentation, like you mentioned, is sort of so critical, because it's so time consuming. It's so time consuming, and whereas even though it is the maximum impact that one can create with the government work in certain ways, because funding is a lot more, and the kind of reach, or the land that they're sitting on, sometimes they're so much more impactful, and if they have a vision, it can really be taken ahead. So yeah, I think, building institutions or building kind of policies which promote that kind of thought, and allowing for, not just at institutional level, I think also housing, or whether it's any kind of development one looks at, having more transparent systems of projects, is very critical for growth. So, yeah.
Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for sharing their valuable insights and perspectives throughout the session. I strongly believe that this session was truly a breakdown of the title, Building Legacies for the People, by the People. Like transformability makes a public space or an institution last longer. The idea of permanence increases with the idea of transformability. And I think that was a really huge takeaway, that unless a space is multifunctional or created in a way where multiple kinds of people can access it, it will not be a legacy, so to say. And when it comes to the policy makers, I think we as architects sort of have in our minds taken up the role to want to tell them how these spaces interact with people, and for them to also take it up as the policy makers of the country. So I think thank you so much for this session. I'm going to move on to some individual questions to all of you, followed by a rapid fire. My first question is to the one asking the questions in the session, to Ms. Manisha Agarwal. Could you please recall your memories designing SPA Vijayawada as an architect, contributing to your fraternity? What was your vision at the time, and how do you see the space in action today?
So yeah, you just mentioned that same building, and here we go again. So I think when we actually worked on this as a competition, it was a two-stage open competition, and it's like always, you know, you're throwing a needle in a haystack, and you are hoping that it reaches somewhere. And I think like again, because it is, we do truly believe that we work in a studio format, and also there's two of us, Shantanu and me, and we've had so many experiences, whether it's as students in Ahmedabad, in various institutes, internationally, and also teaching later. So I think in some ways there was a journey which when this project, when we were looking at this project was very, how do you create that kind of space where you would want to learn in, or what does it have? So I think amongst the things was the biggest learning that we had, it wasn't the classroom or the studio, but it was actually all the spaces between them, you know, outside of the classroom. So I think that kind of started off that thought process. And today when we actually go, once you've designed something, it's always very, there's some moments which you had imagined, and there's lots which you haven't. So it's extremely humbling to see places which students have made their own. So the building kind of transforms itself to what they make it. So I don't think after a point an architect really makes the building, it's the people who inhabit too. So I would like to kind of leave it as that, and we are still discovering. We love kind of, you know, stalking their social media or seeing how teachers or feedback comes in from people who've taught there. So it's something which is constantly evolving. So I don't think there's a static moment which we feel it's, you know, one can say it's like this right now for us.
I've been to that building.
Oh,
I think
you
it's
have?
quite amazing actually. And in fact, very few architects get a chance to design a school of architecture. So they're a really lucky firm in that sense. And
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
come out quite nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Our next question is to Ms. Anuprita Dixit. Known for building a legacy, how has IMK Architects evolved throughout your journey? Please elaborate on your vision for the next 25 years.
I don't really know the vision for the next 25 years, what it would be. But in terms of evolution, I think when I joined, which was in 1996, senior Mr. Kadri was still, you know, he was leading the practice. So his way of functioning was quite different. He had a very clear vision of what he wanted to do, and so the way we worked with him was he would instruct and we would follow suit, right? Of course, this was to do with the designs, and then executing the design was left to us. But now the scene has changed. Now the way we work is more collaborative. We have teams, and all of us put our minds together and tackle the designs. Not only that, inside office, but even for every project, we kind of have a workshop with all the stakeholders in the project, all the consultants, everybody who's involved, users, if they are like in a redevelopment project, we have the users also with the existing people who are going to move into the new society. So we spend a day with them just brainstorming on what is really wanted for the project in terms of the new place that they're going to move into. And we also help them understand, so you know, there are various aspirations and needs that everybody puts forth, but not everything is possible to implement, right? So we help them then understand how to choose. So we use the 80-20 principle, and how to choose those 20% features that will give you 80% value. So this is a thing that we do in our office regularly for any project, and I think that participatory approach and the collaborative approach is what is the change that has happened over the years. 25 years, I really don't know. I'm close to retirement. I don't know. Wouldn't want to say much on that.
No problem, ma'am. Thank you so much. Our next question is to Mr. Surya Kakani. With your couple of years stint as Dean of Sept University, could you share your journey and vision during that time in shaping the future for young generations?
I want to know this.
That's a part complex, controversial, but no, I think it is very interesting. I had been more a visiting faculty all this while, and then I was given this opportunity. One of the things that one realized, and there were a lot of discussions. You see, the problem is it looks like one person doing it, but actually there's a whole cohort. So I'm just a representation of a thought, but it's a cohort that's thinking. So there was this thing about 10 years ago, it had become from a school to a university. And there was a huge pressure from the governing council to scale. Now, when you have a school which is about 400 or 500 students to becoming 2,000, and it had already grown, how do you manage studios? How do you manage? And you had to increase number of students intakes, you had to change a lot of things. So then there's the idea of breaking down the studios into various, where you broke it up into certain parts. So you had an L1, which is the foundation, then you had L2, which is certain kinds, and you had L3, which is, and you also opened up the idea that practice could, your professional training could be a student's choice. It doesn't have to be you could basically, you could go move, the student could cross move in different ways. So these were structural systems. One of the challenges was equally to get faculty. You see, because the number of students increase, and there are, the biggest advantage of SEPT has always been the professionals practicing in town coming to teach. And that's at the same time that the institution is growing, the city is also growing. The architects have a lot of work. So it's not easy for them to be able to commit to come to teach and to find ways and mechanisms to go and talk to them and talk to them to come to teach. And my friend here did it only once, but that's good enough. So there's always that, so there are those changes that we have, and I think and the studios and the system is evolving. It has been left at a point where maybe what was thought out, it's not the exact same thing, but it is flexible enough to pan out in a different way. And I have some reservations on some things, but that's now no longer my role. Certain things are working very, very well. I think it's a far more, there is a thing about having, when you go back to an alma mater, for a lot of I'm not from this school, but for a lot of people, this is an alma mater. So when they come back and see, it's probably a little bit difficult for them to, mostly probably, students who come back and see the place is very different. But the challenges of creating more numbers is also very complex. And in that sense, SEPT has survived well. If you look at 60 years back, 70 years back, and it has continued, and it still continues to be what it professes in terms of being a center for excellence in a certain sense. That has not been lost, and I think the key is that. So.
Thank you so much, sir. I think to reiterate what you had said earlier, SEPT is one place where infrastructure did not overtake its people. So I think that's quite an accomplishment. Our final question is to Sachin Bandukwala. From micro to macro interventions, your collaborative practice spans furniture, architecture, and urban research. Which aspect excites you the most, and how do you balance these different scales and design thinking?
Self-similarity and variety. It's pretty simple as that. I see direct connections. If you see nature, there is self-similarity in things that brings harmony, and then there is variety / mutation that brings evolution. We look at that in our projects.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. We are going to do a quick rapid fire with all of you. Anybody who has the question can answer first. All four of you can go together, however you'd like. But this will be a fast one. So the first one is, what is your dream corner project?
I'm diagonally opposite. I want to build a village in the sky.
All right, so the next one is, how do you find design inspiration? Where do you find design inspiration? Travel.
Respecting and again learning new things.
Rubbing carbon on basic.
Rethinking.
All right. One word about working with the government.
Patience.
Yo-yo ride.
Very true. An architect you always look up to.
An architect you would always look up to.
There are too many.
Yeah, there's several.
I think we should move out of the icon.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
That's right. How do architects forecast trends?
They make it.
Oh, that's a very good answer. They make them. All right, just to resonate with the theme of the year, what is legacy for you in one word?
Inevitable.
This one I want from everybody.
Timelessness.
Spirit of time. Spirit.
Silence.
Yeah, void. Void. Give each other some space.
All right, thank you so much for being here today and taking out time to have this amazing session with all our audience here. We would now like to open the floor to questions from the audience if we have any. Is there anybody in this wide range of subjects that we have here?
Yes, my question is to Kakani sir. So I went to the school that you have designed, SNK in Rajkot. Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I believe you have designed a school in Rajkot called SNK. The question is related to this topic. I think it was proposed as another project and then it transformed into a co-ed school, and now there are class 5 to class 12 studying there, and every 3 months it is transformed into a sort of gathering. So my question is, and even during COVID it was transformed into a hospital. Yeah. So my question is, how do you predict or how do you design a space in such a way that it will be used in all these different ways and mannerisms in the future?
I mean, one really didn't know that it will transform into all of these things. But the school or institutions are a little easier to manage because they're largely halls and rooms, and because in this situation they were all separate, and it was basically a campus. And I think, other than we always talk about buildings being flexible, I think human beings are equally flexible. If you put them in certain spaces, like I'm sure Cobb never thought there will be this kind of stuff that happens in this building. Most of the time, very different things happen all. And so, but this building takes it all in many ways. So I think sometimes the purpose or the particular act of as it can find a way in any building, as long as it's large open spaces. So in that sense, SNK works because it's that, and it is a campus which is out of the city. So yeah.
I wanted to ask one more related to this. So, what was the brief that was given to you when you accepted the project? And also, how has it changed all these years? Have you visited the campus in the recent years?
The brief by Kiran Bhai was that it should be a campus. He had already 4,000-5,000 students in the city, and this was supposed to be a campus outside city where when the students, for every year, 2 weeks, they would spend on that campus, no books, yoga, meditation, dance, theater, sports, and they would do that for 2 weeks, and then they go back to everyday life. That all students will get a chance like that in their life for 2 weeks. It ran like that for 2 or 3 years. Then it became so popular, and I think it became, I think there was such a huge demand that he converted it into a regular school. And so that's how it has evolved over time. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there a few times, different times. The trees have grown well. And the amazing thing is, it's just for those who don't know, this is basically a large thatch school, huge, quite a large, huge actually, by any scale, different huts, large. But they have maintained, I think one must really credit, because these are not easy things to manage and maintain, and it's post-earthquake. There were a lot of experiments, and post-earthquake to now, it's nearly 20 plus years. Every 4 years, they change the thatch. They turn it around. They've set up an agency, and it looks, in the way they've managed and maintained this building, it's just amazing. It's probably one of the most difficult buildings to maintain, actually. But I mean, I think it's credit to the system.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Do we have anybody else in the audience with a question?
I just have one question for any of you who can answer. When we say for the building legacies, for the people and by the people, what is the priority you give first? Is it what you want to put it in the design, or what you want the users to put it in the design?
Users, no? You're doing it for the user, but you have to guide the user because the user is not knowledgeable.
Exactly. So that is what is the first priority you give? Like basic first cut that we say, okay, this is what it's going to be, but then it's the users who guide you.
I think participation is very important. So for example, in a lot of our projects, within our studio, we'll frame a lot of questions. Go back to the, whether it's students or whether it's faculty or whether it's, if you're doing a housing, sometimes there are no audiences to ask those questions. But if there are, we'll pose those questions to them. And then there is this whole sort of back and forth. So there is, if it is a singular client, unfortunately, they sometimes write the brief, but then we choose to question the brief. Is that really what is needed? Could you also, so I think it's a little bit of both. I wouldn't say it's one or the other, but I think there is a seamless process of back and forth. Yeah.
I think mostly, I think all of us will agree, most of us will agree to that, it's the user, and then obviously our own ambitions, and where we all come from independently of how we think about architecture and how we think about the nature of the container. But it is going to be the brief. But the architect can expand the brief.
Yeah.
The architect has that agency. And I think that's a very powerful agency, what we don't realize. We can expand the brief more than what it is given to you. So I think that's...
No, sometimes question it so much, like which is what competition sometimes allow us to do. And we've noticed that they come back with our brief. So, and change it for everyone else. But, you know, so we've had that experience, and it was extremely, so what you were thinking about, you have to be able to ask the questions. You should not just accept what is being given and say that this is I think that is one of the roles we feel importantly about as an architect.
Thank you so much. With that, let's have a huge round of applause for our guests for the evening.